Here is the complete translation into modern, natural, conversational English. Did you know that at the height of World War II, when the fate of the free world was hanging by a thread, and American Marines were cursing their weapons in the green hells of the Pacific Islands, the solution to all their problems already existed? It was not hidden in the secret laboratories of Nazi Germany. It was not being developed in the steel mills of Detroit. This solution was sitting on a workbench in a modest little workshop in Mexico City, covered in gun oil and charcoal dust. Picture a machine gun so light that a farmer who had never held one before could run into battle with it without getting out of breath. Picture a mechanism so brilliantly simple that you could completely disassemble it without a single screwdriver or wrench. All you needed was one cartridge. This is the story of how Mexican ingenuity was decades ahead of its time. This is the chronicle of the Mendoza RM2 machine gun and the tragedy of a man who proved that David can beat Goliath when it comes to skill and craftsmanship, but is almost always doomed to lose when it comes to politics. To really understand the greatness of what Rafael Mendoza created, we have to go back into the mud of 1942. The world is on fire. In Guadalcanal, in Tarawa, in the swamps of New Guinea, American soldiers are fighting a brutal war of attrition against the Japanese Empire. Their main tool for laying down suppressive fire, their security blanket in battle, was the legendary Browning automatic rifle, the BARM 1918. History books call it an icon, but if you ask the veterans, they will tell you a very different story. The BAR was a beast, but it was an old, tired beast. It weighed almost 9 kilograms without ammunition. In the jungle, where every single step is exhausting, that kind of weight would break your back. It was long and awkward, constantly getting snagged on vines. But its worst flaw was that it had no quick-change barrel. In combat, the machine gun is the heart of the squad. It has to keep firing, so the enemy cannot raise their heads. But if you fire the BAR for too long, the barrel gets red hot. The metal starts to warp, accuracy goes out the window, and eventually the gun can literally explode in the shooter's hands. Soldiers had to stop firing at the most critical moments of the battle just to let the barrel cool down. Meanwhile, Japanese Nambu machine guns, or the German MG-42s in Europe, kept pouring out lead without mercy. The Allies desperately needed, to the point of pain, a new weapon. Something that combined the firepower of a heavy machine gun with the portability of a rifle. Engineers at the big American arms companies, Colt, Winchester, Springfield, wrestled with this problem for years. They burned through millions of dollars in budgets, but only managed to create complicated, expensive mechanisms. And while those industry giants were spinning their wheels, in Mexico, far from the front lines, one man had already solved it, Rafael Mendoza Blanco. Remember that name because history has unfairly erased it from public memory. He was not some white-collar designer in a fancy office. He never graduated from prestigious Ivy League schools. Mendoza was a natural-born genius, an engineer by the grace of God, born into the hard realities of northern Mexico. He was born in 1885 in Santo Tomas, Chihuahua. He grew up in a time when being able to fix a complex mechanism with just a hammer and a piece of wire could mean the difference between life and death. He witnessed the Mexican Revolution firsthand. He saw expensive European Mauser rifles jam in the sand of the Sonora Desert. He saw Pancho Villa's soldiers die because they could not quickly clear a jam in the middle of a fight. They simply did not have the special tools. That experience shaped his entire philosophy. For Mendoza, a weapon was not a fancy parade accessory. It was a survival tool. In the 1930s, he set himself an ambitious goal: create the perfect machine gun for the Mexican soldier. And here is the first secret of his success. Mendoza truly understood the physical build of his own people. The average Mexican infantryman of that era was shorter and lighter than the average American or German soldier. Handing a 10-kilogram iron club to such a man meant he would be exhausted before the battle even began. Mendoza wanted to put lightning in their hands, something light, fast, and deadly. His design philosophy was a radical break from the traditions of the time. American and German arms schools believed in the principle of the tighter and more precise, the better. They chased micrometric tolerances and perfect fits, as if they were building Swiss watches instead of weapons. Mendoza took a different path, one that people would only call genius decades later, when Mikhail Kalashnikov used similar ideas. Mendoza deliberately used loose tolerances. He intentionally left space between moving parts. Why? Because war is dirt. If parts fit perfectly, the first grain of sand will jam the gun fatally. Mendoza invited the dirt in. He designed the gun so that sand, carbon fouling, and swamp mud could pass straight through the mechanism and get blown out when it fired, without stopping the action. That was bold, first-class engineering. He replaced expensive, complex steel milling with simple but tough stamped parts. Where the Americans used 10 pieces, Mendoza used 3. By 1943, his masterpiece was ready. He called it the RM2, Rafael Mendoza Model 2. It looked strange, short, stout, with the magazine sticking up like a rhinoceros horn. But the moment you picked it up, you understood. It was revolutionary. It weighed only 6.4 kilograms, 30% lighter than the American equivalent. The balance was perfect, but the real magic was inside. Mendoza used a short-stroke gas piston and rotating bolt system, the same basic design that became the gold standard for assault rifles worldwide. In 1943, it looked like pure magic. After German submarines sank Mexican tankers like the Potrero del Llano and Faja de Oro, Mexico entered the war on the Allied side. The government saw the 2 ringgits as a chance to show the world that Mexico was no longer just a rural backwater. We had created a war machine that had no equal in the arsenals of the great powers. Soldiers who tested the early prototypes came back with shining eyes. "It doesn't kick you in the shoulder," they said in amazement. The muzzle brake, another Mendoza invention, tamed the recoil so well that you could fire long bursts standing up and still stay in control. But Mendoza knew that for his creation to survive and for the Productos Mendoza factory to become a global giant, he needed a bigger market than just the Mexican army. He needed the Allies. American intelligence was already sending reports to Washington about interesting experiments happening south of the border. U.S. generals, who were desperately looking for a replacement for the outdated BAR, could not ignore the rumors. In late 1943, Rafael Mendoza received an official invitation. The United States Army wanted him at Aberdeen Proving Ground. They wanted a competition. The best American, British, and captured German weapons against this Mexican newcomer. Mendoza accepted. He packed the RM2 in a wooden crate, took the blueprints, and boarded the train north. He was confident he would win. He did not yet realize he was walking into a battle where the rules are written not by engineers, but by politicians, and where winning on the range does not guarantee victory in the war of interests and egos. Before we get to that fateful day at Aberdeen, let's open up the receiver of the RM2 and take a look inside. If you love mechanics, if the dance of metal and gunpowder excites you, what Mendoza did will make your heart race. In those days, most machine guns were temperamental divas. To keep them running, the gun team needed a special leather tool pouch full of punches of different sizes, screwdrivers, and special wrenches. That was the infantry's Achilles heel. Imagine a soldier wading through a swamp up to his waist under mortar fire. If he loses that tool pouch, his gun becomes a useless club after the first serious jam. Rafael Mendoza was thinking about that soldier, the kid from a Mexican village who might not have an engineering degree but had sharp survival instincts. And then he had an idea that, in a fair world, should have put him in the pantheon of the greatest firearms designers alongside Browning, Kalashnikov, and Stoner. The RM2 could be completely disassembled, down to the last screw right there in the field, with no tools at all. How? Using the one thing the soldier always carries, a cartridge. Yes, you heard that right. The tip of a standard .30-06 bullet served as a universal tool. Mendoza designed every pin, screw, retainer, and latch so that its slot perfectly matched the shape of the bullet tip. Think about the beauty of that logic. As long as you have ammunition, you have a complete repair kit. And if you run out of ammo, there is no point repairing the gun anyway. It was war ergonomics taken to its absolute extreme, a level of care for the ordinary soldier that no desk-bound designer in Berlin or Washington ever imagined. A soldier could remove the bolt group, clean the carbon from the gas tube, and reassemble the whole gun in under 3 minutes in pouring rain, using only one cartridge from his own magazine. But Mendoza did not stop there. The second big curse of light machine guns is the barrel. Intense automatic fire heats the steel until it glows. Keep firing, and the barrel warps. The gun can literally explode in your hands. The American bar had a fixed barrel. Once it overheated, you had to stop shooting and pray it cooled down. In combat, wait is another word for die. The British Bren had a changeable barrel, but the swap was slow and fiddly. Mendoza created a ridiculously simple and effective quick-change system. On the side of the gun, there was a big, chunky button. You pressed it, rotated the barrel 90 degrees, and simply pulled it forward. Slide in a cold barrel, give it a quarter turn, loud metallic click. Done. 5 seconds. No asbestos gloves, no delicate threads that could clog with dirt. It was foolproof, panic-proof, chaos of war-proof. The RM2 used a top-mounted box magazine. Gravity helped the spring push the heavy cartridges into the chamber, making feed failures extremely rare. Another thoughtful detail, it fired from an open bolt. Most rifles fire from a closed bolt. Machine guns need an open bolt so air can flow through the barrel between bursts and cool it. Usually this hurts accuracy because the heavy bolt slams forward right before the shot. Mendoza solved that with a unique floating firing pin that actually improved first shot accuracy. The gun did not buck. It stayed on target. And finally, cost. War is economics too. Each American BAR cost the US government hundreds of dollars back then, thousands in today's money. It required massive bars of high-grade forged steel that were milled for hours, wasting 70% of the metal as chips. The RM2 was a hymn to efficiency. It used simple turn parts that any factory could make, and lots of tough stampings for non-critical pieces. The receiver was rough, no fancy polishing, but as sturdy as a tractor. Mendoza understood modern industrial design before most people. Form follows function. There was not a single gram of extra metal, not one decorative flourish. The bipod was light, but dug firmly into the ground. The wooden stock was shaped to absorb recoil, not to look pretty. When engineers compared the RM2 blueprints to its contemporaries, they saw a huge philosophical gulf. The Bayar had over 120 parts, many tiny, with springs that could fly into the grass and be lost forever if you opened the cover the wrong way. The RM2 had fewer than 80 parts, and every major assembly was large, solid, and almost impossible to break by hand. Historians still argue about one thing. Mendoza's gas piston and its layout look suspiciously similar to designs that appeared a few years later in the Soviet Union and made Mikhail Kalashnikov famous. Mendoza essentially created the American Kalashnikov years before Sergeant Kalashnikov started sketching in a hospital. Coincidence? Convergent evolution by two brilliant minds facing the same problems? We may never know for sure, but the fact remains. In 1943, Rafael Mendoza was at the absolute cutting edge of the world. His gun was also versatile. He made versions in 7x57mm Mauser for Mexico and in powerful .30-06 Springfield for the United States. The conversion was simple. This showed he was not just thinking about arming Mexico. He saw Mexico as the arsenal of democracy, a key supplier to the Allies. The Productos Mendoza factory was ready to scale. They had patents, working prototypes, and workers eager to get to the machines. All they needed was the general's signature. Full of confidence, with his perfect machine under his arm, Rafael Mendoza arrived in Maryland. Aberdeen Proving Ground was waiting, but he did not realize he was not just going for technical tests. He was walking into a confrontation with the most dangerous opponent any innovator can face, the wounded pride of a superpower. What happened on that firing range in the following hours became one of the bitterest and most instructive chapters in Mexican industrial history. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, the holy of holies of American military technology, the place where inventors' dreams are crushed and decisions are made about what weapons will kill people for the next decade. Late 1943. The air smells of cordite and autumn dampness. A group of high-ranking generals and colonels from the Ordnance Corps stand in the observation tower. Their uniforms are spotless, boots gleaming, faces unreadable. On a dirty table below them sit two weapons. One is the massive revered American BAR 1918, symbol of Uncle Sam's power. The other is a small, strange, angular machine gun, the RM2, brought by an engineer from a country these men usually thought of only as a source of oil and cheap labor. Rafael Mendoza stands beside his creation. He looks calm, but inside a storm is raging. He knows this is not just a test, it is a trial. He is alone. No lobbyists, no corporate backing, just him and his machine against the entire American military-industrial complex. The demonstration begins. First test, controllability. A big American sergeant with rolled-up sleeves picks up the BAR, plants the stock against his shoulder, and pulls the trigger. Tack, tack, tat. The heavy gun jumps wildly in his hands, barrel climbing toward the sky. He has to wrestle it back on target. Then, with obvious skepticism, he picks up the RM2. It feels like a toy, too light. He aims, pulls the trigger. The sound is different, dry, crisp, rhythmic. Tack, tack, tack. The gun stays planted on the bipod like it is welded to the earth. Mendoza's muzzle brake vents the gases sideways, killing the recoil. The barrel does not climb. Bullets punch tight groups and shred the target. The sergeant stops firing and stares at the gun with a look that is half confusion, half respect. The generals in the tower exchange glances and give small nods. Not bad for Mexican craftsmanship, but that was just the warm-up. Next comes the real test, mud torture. They submerge the guns in a trough of liquid mud to simulate the trenches of Flanders or the swamps of Burma. First, the BAR. They pull it out dripping with mud. The sergeant pulls the trigger. Click, nothing. The bolt is jammed. Sand has seized the tight micrometric tolerances. He has to kick the charging handle, swear, and fight the mechanism. Now the RM2. They pull it out looking like a lump of clay. Mendoza gives a quick nod. Fire. The sergeant pulls the trigger. Bam, bam, bam. Mud flies out of the receiver in every direction, but the gun keeps shooting. The short-stroke gas system and those intentional loose tolerances simply spit the dirt out. The weapon cleans itself while firing. The officer's eyes go wide. This was not in the script. The Mexican gun was supposed to fail and prove American steel superior, but it worked where the American legend had died. Then comes the final blow. An officer with a stopwatch orders a full field strip. Simulate a critical battlefield malfunction. You have 3 minutes. The soldier with the BAR frantically opens his leather tool pouch, hands shaking, searching for the right punch. He carefully removes pins, terrified of losing tiny springs in the tall grass. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. He is still struggling with the gas regulator, sweat pouring into his eyes. The soldier working on the RM2 does something that makes every general lean forward. He does not reach for tools. He simply pulls a cartridge from the magazine. Using the bullet tip, he presses the receiver latch. One move, stock off. Second move, bolt group in his hands. Third, gas piston out. He wipes the parts with a rag and puts it all back together. Click, gun ready, time, 55 seconds. No tools, one bullet. A deathly silence falls over the range. Only the wind can be heard. The American military engineers, men who have spent their lives designing weapons, stare at Mendoza. In their eyes is a mixture of admiration and fear. They have just seen the future of infantry weapons, and it does not say made in USA, it says made in Mexico. The classified Aberdeen technical report that later reached the Pentagon was brutally honest. The experts admitted that Mendoza's gun beat the BAR in weight, ease of maintenance, production cost, and reliability in harsh conditions. It was 3 times cheaper. Objectively, it was the best light machine gun the Allies had available at that moment. If the world sat on pure military logic, if the only goal was to save soldiers' lives, the United States would have ordered 100,000 units that very night. They would have armed the Marines with the RM2 for the bloody assaults on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Thousands of American boys would have come home alive, thanks to Mexican engineering. But here enters the real villain of this story. More dangerous than any enemy soldier, politics and pride. America in 1943 was in the middle of a production frenzy. Factories belonging to Colt, General Motors, Remington were running 3 shifts, raking in multi-million-dollar contracts. Adopting a foreign weapon, especially one from Mexico, was unthinkable. Mexico had nationalized its oil industry in 1938 and kicked out American companies. The wound was still fresh. Washington viewed Mexico with suspicion. How do you explain to American taxpayers that the world's greatest industrial power has to buy rifles from its poor neighbor? How do you tell Congress that a self-taught Mexican working in a garage beat design teams with million-dollar budgets? The not invented here syndrome, a terrible disease of military bureaucracies, took over. The decision was not made on the firing range, but in carpeted offices in Washington. The official reply given to Mendoza was polite but ice cold. "Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. Your weapon is interesting, but our production lines are already set up for the BAR. Changing them now would create a logistical nightmare." It was a half-truth wrapped around a lie. Yes, logistics matter, but the RM2's advantages were so overwhelming that any retooling risk would have been worth it. What followed was even darker: silent theft. The U.S. military did not buy the gun, but they kept it for further study. Engineers took it apart down to the smallest piece. They photographed everything, redrew the bolt designs, analyzed the alloys, and absorbed Mendoza's ideas. Years later, when the United States introduced its famous M60 machine gun, the one Rambo carried through the jungles of Vietnam, many weapons experts noticed disturbing similarities: the belt feed mechanism, the use of stamped steel, the gas system principles. It was not an exact copy, but it was clear intellectual appropriation. Ideas Mendoza developed in the 1930s suddenly became American innovations in the 1950s. Rafael Mendoza left the United States empty-handed. He packed his perfect gun back into its wooden box. He had won the fair fight of metal against metal, but he was crushed in the dirty game of geopolitics. He returned to Mexico City, understanding a bitter truth: being the best is not enough when you were born on the wrong side of the border. But the RM2's story did not end there. Back home in Mexico, it enjoyed a proud but tragically short second life, a mirror of our entire lost industrial potential. Rejected by the superpower, the RM2 was welcomed as a hero in Mexico. The Mexican army, tired of depending on foreign supplies, adopted it. From the late 1940s through the 1950s, the Mendoza RM2 was the striking fist of Mexican infantry. It became a symbol of sovereignty. Picture those black and white newsreel images: the September 16th parade in the Zocalo, thousands of soldiers marching in step, each carrying an RM2 on his shoulder. It was our weapon, not a Lend-Lease handout from the United States, not scrap bought from ruined Europe. It was Mexican steel, designed by a Mexican mind to defend Mexican soil. The Productos Mendoza company was thriving. It seemed Rafael's dream had come true. We had proved we could be self-sufficient. But history is a cruel writer, and the worst enemy was waiting not on the battlefield, but in the future. The RM2's fate became tied to Cold War global politics. By the 1960s, the old World War II calibers, .30-06 and 7 by 57 mm Mauser, were becoming obsolete. NATO and the United States were switching to the new 7.62 by 51 mm cartridge. Mexico, living in the shadow of its powerful northern neighbor, felt the pressure to modernize and stay compatible with its allies. The Mexican government faced a choice. Option 1, give Rafael Mendoza and his team subsidies and resources to develop the RM3 in the new caliber. Preserve the National Design School and independence. Option 2, take the easy road, buy foreign licenses. As so often happens in our history, the officials chose the easy road. First they bought Belgian FN-FAL rifles. Then came the final blow. They adopted the German G3 rifle, purchasing the license from Heckler & Koch. A factory was built in Mexico, but it was only assembly, not real creation. The patents stayed in German hands, royalties flowed to Oberndorf, and Mexican engineers went from inventors to mere maintainers of someone else's ideas. The brilliant RM2 was quietly withdrawn from service. Thousands of these masterpieces were sent to gather dust in warehouses. Many were melted down. The luckiest became dusty museum pieces. The nation's ability to design and build complex weapons was lost in favor of copying. It is the same curse that killed Mexican cars, Camarana's color television, and our national aircraft industry. The talent was there. The will to protect it was not. What happened to the great Productos Mendoza company is a story full of bitter irony, familiar to every Mexican, even those who have never held a military weapon. After losing government military contracts, the company had to reinvent itself to survive. Mendoza turned to the civilian market. If you grew up in Mexico in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, the name Mendoza is sacred to you, but not because of machine guns. You know the brand for its air rifles, the famous pellet guns you used to shoot cans in the backyard or win prizes at fairs. You know it for metal rulers, compasses, and geometry sets you carried in your school backpack. Think for a moment about the tragedy of that transformation. The same machines and the same brilliant engineering minds that in the 1940s created a technology capable of embarrassing the American military's industrial complex and potentially changing the course of World War II ended up stamping school rulers and toy guns for killing rats. There is nothing shameful about honest work that kept the company alive for more than 100 years. It still exists and operates today, but it is a loud, cruel reminder of potential that was never fulfilled. Imagine an alternate universe where the Mexican government supported Mendoza with the same passion and patriotism that the United States gave Colt or Belgium gave FN Herstal. Today, Mexico might not just be a country that assembles other people's cars. We could be a global exporter of high-tech defense systems. We could have our own Silicon Valley in Puebla or Mexico City, generating patents, foreign currency, and real influence. Instead, we became a maquiladora, the world's assembly workshop. Rafael Mendoza died in 1966. He left this world as a respected man, but with sadness in his heart. He knew his creation was perfect. He knew he had won a fair engineering duel. He also knew he had not been born in the right geographic location for history to give him credit. His legacy lives on in every Mexican child who receives their first Mendoza air rifle as a gift on Three Kings Day. But the true jewel, the Combat RM2, became a relic. Today, at auctions in the United States, collectors pay tens of thousands of dollars for deactivated examples of the Mendoza machine gun. American firearms experts on YouTube post videos of themselves disassembling it and shake their heads in admiration. They call it the Mexican masterpiece. 80 years later, they openly recognize what their grandfathers' generals were afraid to admit publicly. It was the best weapon of its era. This story is not just about a piece of metal that shoots. It is a parable about our national identity. We have been told 1,000 times that high technology comes from somewhere else, that our role is tourism, oil, and cheap labor, that complex things are made by Germans, Japanese, or Americans. The story of Rafael Mendoza is living proof that this is a lie. Mexican ingenuity, the ability to solve incredibly complex problems with simple, elegant, and inexpensive methods, is a world-class resource. We have never lacked brains. What we have lacked is faith in ourselves and leaders willing to bet on our own talent against the whole world. The next time you see the Mendoza logo with the eagle on a school ruler or on an old air rifle in your grandfather's closet, look at it with respect. Remember that eagle was not born to draw lines in notebooks. It was born in the flames of innovation. It was created to win world wars. It was created by a man who looked industrial giants in the eye and did not blink. The RM2 machine gun is the ghost of the great industrial power we could have been. And maybe, if we learn this lesson, it will become the seed of what we can still become one day. Because the talent has not disappeared. It is simply waiting for its next shot.